takeaways from the gospel this morning is that sickness has the power to begin the healing process. Not cure, but healing, which is an inward reorientation towards the God of life. I'll explain. I recently read about a person by the name of Fred who was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And after an initial period of distress, something amazing happened to him. He simply stopped doing everything that wasn't essential. And his life began to be peaceful and vital. But an unusual thing happened. The doctors decided to change their mind. And when he found this out, when he found out that what he had wasn't a terminal illness, but was actually rare but curable, and they told him this over the phone, that was indeed the case, he wept like a baby, because he was afraid that his life would return to the way in which it was before. But for that brief moment, his life had reoriented to the priorities that were most important. His life was reoriented towards the God of life. And this amazing reorientation that happened to Fred has been repeated elsewhere. A guy by the name of Michael Lerner, who works with people who are diagnosed with cancer, said, if I had been told that same sort of thing, he said, I would pay a great deal of attention to the inner healing process that I had hoped that a cancer diagnosis would trigger in me. I would give careful thought to the meaning of my life, what I had to let go of, what I needed to keep. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the poet John Updike. He tells this poem called Fever. It says the same thing. It's brief. It goes like this. I have brought good news from the land of 102 degrees. God exists. I had seriously doubted it before, but the bedpost spoke of it with uttermost confidence. The threads in my blanket took it for granted. The trees outside the window dismissed all complaints, and I have not slept so justly for years. It is hard now to convey how emblematically appearances set upon the membranes of my consciousness, but it is a truth long known that some secrets are hidden from health. All this brings us back to our text, our gospel text this morning. At first glance in Mark's gospel, we see Jesus busy curing, right? Simon and Andrew's mother, and of course the many people who had diseases and demons that were brought to Simon and Andrew's mother's door. But note that the demons try to speak about Jesus and his work, and he silences them. This is more than about the fact that Mark talks about the messianic secret, which is, don't tell anybody I'm the Messiah. You know it, but don't tell anybody. This is much more than that. The demons speak in half-truths. It's very, very seductive to get a half-truth. They would have us pay attention to the fact that Jesus is a miracle worker only. That his work is only about us being cured. Sure, we want to be cured. But to just look at that is a lesson in missing the point. What Jesus is about is so much deeper than cure. And if there is to be a response from the crowd or from us, it would be repentance, which is a reorienting of our lives towards the God of life. You see, the deeper notion at work here is that Jesus heals. He readjusts our priority towards God, and through healing moves us to serve. It's all right there in the text. Consider for a moment the people who had come to Jesus with their loved ones and friends at night. They are moving at night precisely because the law is very clear about what's permissible, about what's clean and unclean, what you can and can't do. The people being brought to Jesus are in need of something beyond cure. Being unclean, they've been locked out of the goodness of society and family. They've been cut off. They are marginalized. And God's law, which was given for the good, has now become a cudgel in their lives, and they are miserable. One of the many descriptors of evil is the privation of good. Isn't that interesting? And that's the state in which these people who are being brought to Jesus are in. They're not experiencing good. It is privated because of the law. They don't know goodness in their lives. Enter Jesus, and he is healing with its salvation. Now, the word salvation, in its best sense, in the Greek, translates to mean wholeness. And that's what Jesus does to the crowd that is brought to him. They are more than cured. They are more than restored to their original health. They are made whole. The priorities of the reign of God are brought upon them, and their social connections are reestablished. They're reintegrated in society. They're back with their families. And their longing for connectedness has been restored. That is good. But there's more here to uncover. Note, too, that earlier in this story, Jesus heals Simon and Andrew's mother. Now, in a short rehash of the story, and in response, she's sick. Jesus goes. He pours his life energies into her. He helps her up. What does she do? She gets up and she serves. That's a cue for you and me who follow Jesus. Healing from God, whether for ourselves or for others, should move our hearts towards reorientation, which is the action of repentance. And once connected to God, it should empower us to serve the priorities of the reign of God. If it ever feels like we're preaching politics here at St. Clare's, it is because the gospel cuts against the kinds of things that we hold dear in society. God has priorities, and sometimes they make us uncomfortable. But herein lies another truth. Whenever we make time for another person who is suffering, we give of ourselves, our lives, our energies, and of the Spirit of God within us, and bearing the person's dis-ease. And in that process of doing that, healing takes place. That's what goes on when we do pastoral care. It's not so much about cure as it is about healing. And naturally, we have to have boundaries sometimes, you know. You can't give your whole life to one person or one cause. However, this Lent, my own discipline will be about thinking about those persons for whom I am disconnected from and haven't seen for some time. And I intend to make it my own intention to be the face of Jesus for those who are lonely and allow God to work through me for those who have need. This leads us to ask, how might we experience Jesus' healing on a regular basis in our lives? Well, we all stand, bless you by the way, we all stand at the edge of Lent, right? I mean, next Sunday is the last Sunday of Epiphany, and then, whoop, here we are in Lent. And don't panic because it won't be that. I mean, my goodness, we're going to be in Holy Week in March, for crying out loud. You know? And then the best part of all is that Easter is April Fool's Day. Oh, the stuff writes itself. That's right, Ash Wednesday's Valentine's Day. This stuff writes itself. Well, I guess so. Yeah, exactly. So, you know, in Lent, as you know, it's a popular time of year we like to be able to fast from all kinds of things. We talk about giving up drinking, or giving up anger, or giving up chocolate, etc. You know how that goes. But I don't believe it goes quite far enough, especially in tying this into this morning's gospel. The work of the Spirit is also about, again, reorienting our lives towards the God of life. So let's not be content with just fasting, but let's also focus on feasting on those things that draw us closer to Jesus and his love, so that we too can experience healing. Here are a few things to consider. How about fasting from discontent and feasting on gratitude? Fasting from anger and feasting on patience. Fast from pessimism and feast on optimism. I saw that. Fasting from bitterness and feasting on forgiveness. Fasting from self-concern and feasting on compassion for others. Fasting from discouragement and feasting on hope. Fasting from lethargy and feasting on enthusiasm. Fasting from suspicion and feasting on the truth. Fasting from thoughts that weaken and feasting on promises that inspire. Fast from shadows of sorrow and feast on the sunlight of serenity. Fasting from idle gossip and feasting on purposeful silence. Fast from problems that overwhelm and feast on prayer that sustains. Sound good to you?
Yes.
Yeah, it sounds like healing to me too.